my right, and I believe we've got some people online as well, but we'll start with my right.
Yes, Chris Steeble, Deputy Secretary of Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group.
Stephen Groves, I'm the Acting Associate Secretary.
David Hanley, I'm the DepSec for Naval Shipbuilding and Sustainment Group.
Welcome.
Sue Drennan, I'm the Acting Senior Executive Director for Performance Audit Services Group.
Ian Goodwin, Group Executive Director, Performance Audit Services Group.
Carolee McLeish, Auditor General.
Rona Mello, Deputy Auditor General.
Sean Benfield, Senior Executive Director, leading the performance statements, financial statement and IT work in Defence.
Amy Wilmot, Executive Director, Performance Audit Services Group.
Excellent. I'm Josh Burns, I'm the Chair of the Committee, with the Deputy Chair, my colleagues and Secretariat. All right. This hearing is a formal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of the Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I remind all present that as Chair I will ensure the proceedings are conducted in an orderly, respectful and courteous way. I further remind committee members that public officials should not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and should be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions to superior officers or to a minister. However, this does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Witnesses are also reminded that any claim that it would be contrary to the public interest to answer a question must be made by a minister and accompanied by a statement setting out the basis for the claim. Do you have any opening remarks before we open it up for questions?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'd like to make some opening comments, if that's okay.
Please.
Defence welcomes the opportunity to discuss the 23-24 Major Projects Report. Defence acknowledges the extensive work of the Australian National Audit Office and the Defence staff in preparing the report each year. I would like to note that the relationship and the cooperation between the ANAO, in particular this year as we're looking to the 24-25 report, is on a very, very good footing, and I really appreciate the support of the Auditor General as we look to evolving the MPR into the future, and that engagement's been very positive. Defence is delivering capability to the warfighter at speed and with discipline. The 23-24 report demonstrated that overall Defence performance on cost and scope remains strong. The ANAO's analysis highlighted that the overwhelming majority of government-approved scope across the report is forecast to be delivered with confidence. The 21 projects in the 23-24 report have a combined total approved budget of $81 billion. Budget increase since initial second pass approval is predominantly due to Australian government approved additional scope and exchange variation, and happy to talk further about that during this hearing. As is typical for Defence, major capital investment projects of this size and scale. For 23-24, the increase was mainly due to government approval of additional scope through the acquisition of an additional 58 Joint Strike Fighters and the commencement of the production of the Hunter-class frigates. None of the 21 projects in the 23-24 report had a real cost increase, and there has been no cost blowout, as has been reported in the media at this time. Schedule performance continues to be the greatest challenge facing Defence major projects. Most key projects suffering schedule delay or have been managed as projects of concern or interest, ensuring that there is appropriate governance of the associated issues, including ministerial monitoring through performance reporting. This oversight includes mandated senior executive forums between Defence and industry, the construction and monitoring of a dedicated remediation plan, and regular post-second pass independent assurance reviews to determine the targeted support that can be provided. Notably, when considering common projects across the last three major projects report, aggregate schedule variance has remained largely consistent and is expected to remain so until long-term projects retire from being reported. In-year slippage has seen minor improvement. Ultimately, Defence maintains that consideration of schedule delay in aggregate is not the most meaningful way of understanding overall schedule performance. Around half of the total aggregated delay due to slippage is in 3 of the 21 projects, including slippage of the Civil Military Air Traffic Control System, a well-known project of concern. Overall, Defence's performance against cost and scope and schedule is relatively strong given the ambition and the complexity of the portfolio. It is also quite similar to international peers such as the UK and the US. Indeed, many analogous industry endeavours such as infrastructure and oil and gas mega projects demonstrate greater cost and schedule fluctuations. Defence acknowledges the qualification made by the ANAO related to Defence overall capture and management of project lessons. In an effort to improve the quality, relevance and readability of the report and to ensure consistency with its updated 2022 Lessons Learnt policy, Defence refined the way in which it captures lessons from the report. To further improve lessons management, Defence agreed with the ANAO to update to include a section that captures current strategic lessons and the top 5 project level lessons. Defence also acknowledges the Auditor General's emphasis of matter regarding the non-publication of information across the 2023-24 report and project data summary sheets. Defence assessed that the information would or could reasonably be expected to cause damage to the security, defence or international relations of the Commonwealth. In the current security environment, safeguarding of capability information has been critically important. Bad actors can collate and synthesise information in the public domain to gain a view of defence capabilities and potential gaps. The ease and speed of ingestion of open source material has increased exponentially as artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated. Defence continues to publicly report on key acquisition and sustainment projects in the portfolio budget statements, the portfolio additional estimate statements and the Defence annual report. However, the acknowledged need for transparency always must be balanced by national security considerations. Reporting on capability, acquisition and sustainment must take into account any risk to national security from disclosure. This should be a key driver in the review of classification and the scope of the report. Defence provided the ANAO access to all project information required to conduct its assurance review, including material deemed not suitable for publication. The committee has historically regarded the major projects report as an important accountability mechanism that should continue, albeit with potential adjustments as needed. Defence notes the report has been in place since 2007 and 8 and provided the JCPAA and the Australian public assurance oversight across an average of 20 projects each year. Defence previously highlighted opportunities for improvement such as simpler presentation of the project data summary sheets and enhanced analysis of indicators regarding scope, schedule and cost variances. Defence has also recommended a refinement of ANAO's longitudinal analysis of aggregate project data to provide a meaningful, insightful understanding of the risks relating to financial schedule performance with project complexity. And as noted earlier, we're working with the ANAO around what those improvements may be and how we can incorporate that into the future. Defence acknowledges the report should, as a matter of principle, focus on providing the committee with meaningful and insightful view of capability delivery performance and generate continuous improvement across Defence's current and future projects. Should the 25-26 guidelines be submitted and improved, Defence remains committed to working with the JCPAA and the ANAO to ensure the report remains fit for purpose. I thank the Chair for the opportunity to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr Steele. The Deputy Chair's just requested, is it possible to get a copy of that opening statement?
Yes,
there was a submission that was made that I didn't notice was very similar lines, but if it's possible to give a copy of the committee,
I can make that available.
So for the purposes of committee members that are also online, we'll try and go in sort of roughly 10, 15-minute blocks so that every committee member gets a chance to ask questions. If we can all kind of bear with us, if we go down an interesting path, we might continue with it. But I'll start and then I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair. First question was in regards to, in the report 507 that the committee produced, we did recommend that the Defence provide an annual update to the committee as part of the MPR hearings, mainly around improved governance and assurance process as it applies to acquisitions, including progress on embedding this across all projects. Given we are in a hearing, it might be, and Defence did agree to that recommendation, it might be a good chance to get an update on how that's going and how that annual report to the committee can be implemented.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. There are a lot of initiatives that have been undertaken across Defence under various guises and various reform programs. In particular, my reform program around acquisition, sustainment and procurement. But I'll just go back to the 2022 timeframe. In October 2022, the Minister for Defence Industry, Pat Conroy, sought for us to actually reinvigorate how we would look at project performance, the elevation, looking at early indicators and warnings, and there were 6 initiatives that he had us undertake. In particular, the majority of those focused on how we would do projects of concern, projects of interest, how we would strengthen that process, and we did so by renewing the policy in that particular area in February of 23 and then subsequently in October of 23. So that policy is now in place. We are executing the projects of concern and projects of interest. Most importantly, the projects of concern have been very effective in managing some of the more problematic problems that we have had. And in particular, I think the poster child of how that is working well would be in the CMATS program, where we're now on a path to actually achieving the CMATS outcome, albeit much later than we had otherwise envisaged. We have worked closely with Talus. The Minister's played a very active role in driving the remediation plan and tracking that. I think we're now up to the 8th Projects of Concern Summit, and we've had over 10 now across those projects of concern. So it's very active and helps us very much look at that. The other aspects of elevating projects of concern, making sure the remediation plan, we track that, we report into government and into Mindy's office on a monthly basis on projects of concern. We also now have quarterly project reporting where we report to the ministers on project performance across the top 30 of our projects and including some sustainment aspects. And we also now report in and do a biannual health check with the National Security Investment Subcommittee on a biannual basis, and that process is now working. And we're now providing strategic insights to every one of those NSIS meetings in terms of areas of focus so that the committee can focus on that strategically. One of the biggest issues that we've had historically is professionalisation. So looking at the professionalisation is really critical to the performance of our projects. So we've got specific focus on project management, program management, procurement and commercial skilling, engineering and technical skilling and material logistics. You can imagine they are the 4 job families that are critical to delivering projects in both acquisition and in sustainment. We're establishing a Defence Learning Academy which will allow us to have a very structured way of looking at the competency of individuals, the complexity of the projects that we undertake, and marrying up the right people with the right role, the right experience, the right qualifications. If we do that, then we will have people that are more confident, that are more competent, and that will be able to adopt a risk appetite appropriately to those projects as we're moving forward. And that becomes really critical as we look to delivering agile capability into the future. We've strengthened the smart buyer process. So the setting projects up for success is all about how you look through the strategic lens at those projects and consider them, all aspects of that, including programmatically how you will approach it, technically how you would approach it, and commercially how you would approach it. We have a very robust independent assurance and review team that looks independently at each of these projects, provides regular reports into that, into the performance. And we've implemented a new system when we take projects through second pass approval of an implementation risk assessment. That is a delivery manager view of the executability of those programs. We're applying a lot of effort, and noting in my opening statement, I talked about the fact that schedule. So while we are pretty good on achieving scope, we're pretty good on staying within budget. That the area...
Sorry, I'm very sorry, Mr. Dibble. Maybe if you just sort of want to come to the... I know I asked the question, but if you can come to sort of the conclusion of the...
So
yeah.
So we're bringing together a whole range of initiatives as part of the reform in procurement, acquisition and sustainment. These are important aspects. We've got assurance processes that now overlay that and a very robust reporting framework.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the Auditor General on any of the overview? Okay. Let's go into some of the specifics of some of the projects. And you absolutely are correct, Mr. Deeble, that the vast majority of them had green lights next to them. But there's a couple that obviously didn't. So the offshore patrol vessel originally was approved in November 2017 with 12 vessels originally sought to be included as part of the project. And then as part of the preferred supplier of Lursen Australia, the preferred tenderer, it all commenced. But why has that gone down to 6?
Chair, I'll refer you to Dave Hanley.
Chair, it's David Hanley, Deputy Secretary, Naval Shipbuilding and Sustainment Group. That was a government decision on the back of a report that was done looking at our future fleet configuration, and a decision was made by the government to reduce from 12 ships to 6.
And what was the basis of that decision?
It was a basis of, and help me out here, Commodore Jacobson, when you can. The decision was based on an effective use of future budget and the future lethality and capability of the Navy. It was deemed that those ships and the quantity of 6 was appropriate for the task that they had at hand.
Yep. Commodore Michael Jacobson on behalf of Head of Navy Capability. An independent analysis of Navy's surface combatant fleet was conducted and concluded that the OPV platform represented an inefficient use of resources for the civil maritime security tasks at which it was originally designed and procured for, and lacked the survivability and self-defence systems for the surface combatant missions that we thought it might also be required for. From that independent review, based on that, we went from a fleet of 12 hulls down to 6.
And so, given the decision was made that it was surplus to requirement, or that we only needed 6, why did the cost go up from 3.639 million to 3.7 billion?
I'll have to take that on notice. Can you just ask that question again? Absolutely understand the justification of taking the number of vessels down from 12 to 6, surplus to requirement, we have other needs, etc. We only need 6 boats. Sure.
But the total amount of the budget of this whole project didn't decrease, didn't halve, it actually increased. So the question is, how come?
Some of those costs are amortised over 12 ships. When you only delivering 6 ships, some of those costs are going to see an increase on a per ship basis. Those other costs are things like infrastructure, workforce upskilling, cross-skilling, other aspects that we were putting into the program. So I can't definitise, and I can take that on notice if you like to describe in detail, but that's the fundamental.
I appreciate that answer, and happy if you can provide the committee more information. But I guess, upskilling the workforce, having the infrastructure, these would be costs that would be built in no matter how many ships are required. The question is, if there's less ships that are going to overall be built, why did the cost still go up?
I'll have to take it on notice to give you the detail, Chair.
Can I do a follow-up question?
Please.
In a decision like that, where the government has decided to reallocate resources to different projects that would deliver better capability, clearly there is no reallocation of resources because the costs have gone up anyway, but the ships aren't being delivered. Is that something that Defence would advise government on? That if government says, well, we're going to reallocate those resources from one project to another project, do you then say, well, we could do that, Minister, but it's still going to cost more? There are no additional resources to reallocate.
I think what we do is we re-baseline the cost basis for the program, and so we did a lot of effort to remembering that we originally signed the contract for 12 with Lursen, So there was a number of costs that were already embedded into that program. So, for instance, the subcontractors purchased 12 engines for 12 ships. Other subcontractors were purchased for 12 engines. So we had to do a cost recovery program, if you like, to those subcontractors, and we briefed government on those changes and those additional costs that would come as a consequence of going from 12 to 6. So there is embedded costs, and because we went from 12 to 6, those costs had to be dealt with. And we're going through a process at the moment of dealing with each of those subcontracts. I think we've only got 2 to go, but those figures are quite significant when you consider all the supply base that was providing parts, spares, equipment, major equipment items into a 12-vessel program.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator. So, in the report, it said that there were delays to construction of all ships in the support system, impacting the availability of vessels for constabulary operations, requiring Navy to extend ageing AC, PB and other legacy vessels. I mean, was the decision to reduce capability also on the fact that they just weren't being built? Or reduce the number of vessels based on the fact that you didn't have them?
Yeah, what we had to do was amortise that effort, constabulary effort across and Commander Jacobs can talk more about that in particular.
Yeah. So the delays of the program of delivery of the OPVs has placed pressure on the Navy, particularly in instances where we've had to reallocate our portfolio of assets, including our major fleet units, to ensure that we met our training and our operational requirements. And that has put additional pressure on the Navy. However, we're seeing those platforms are being delivered, and we're being able to generate ourselves back into our normal preferred posture.
Okay. Then you go on in the report to say, though, in June 2021, that due to delays in delivery as a result of COVID-19 and technical certification concerns by Navy, what were those technical concerns?
So there were a number of challenges that we had in the design, and we needed to do some work on some of those design efforts. They included activities such as hazard monitoring and damage control systems, damage stability, situational awareness, navigation systems, some emissions compliance, as well as some of the other ancillary systems around the platform. We can go into further details if you wish, but they are the general types of systems.
Nothing to do with the guns? The main gun?
That wasn't an issue for cause of concern for the schedule, no. There was a decision made quite early in the program on the gun.
Do you mind expanding on that, Mr. Hanley?
The configuration of the ship included a main gun. But in our assessment of that particular gun and its safety case, it was considered that was would be non-compliant in our case, in Australian Navy's case. As a result, we removed that requirement from the boat. But it wasn't related to the impacts on the schedule that you heard from Commodore Jacobson.
Yep, and the further advice I'll provide on that is that given the constabulary tasks that we will have for that platform, the gun system we have fitted and bringing into service meets the requirements of the constabulary tasks.
Yeah, which is obviously the whole point, but why then in the report does it say, due to delays in delivery as a result of COVID-19 and technical certification concerns by Navy, Lurson was directed to terminate the main gun contract with Leonardo and investigate an interim gun solution? I mean, it says delays in delivery as a result of COVID-19 being the main reason in the report.
Yeah, we might need to... So there was no impact on schedule as a consequence of the decision on the gun. There was issues, which Commodore Jacobson articulated, technical issues, which stem from the gun, although it sits on the upper deck, goes quite a way through the forecastle of the ship, and there were some structural issues that need to be resolved as a consequence of that, but it wasn't a schedule impact.
Okay. How come that wasn't then put in the major projects report? The MPR, sorry?
I have to take that on notice and work out review that.
And the reason why I asked that question is I think that part of the role of the committee is to ensure that the NPR can be as thorough and as detailed as possible. And obviously there are, as Mr Deeble quite correctly outlined at the start in the opening remarks, there are legitimate concerns around national security that Defence have to be mindful of. But the role of the committee and the Auditor General is also to work out what's gone on, how's it happened, how's significant amounts of public funds being expended and in the appropriate way. And if there is technical difficulties, well, that's something that obviously Defence has to manage, but it seems like that's also a problem of the preferred supplier and the tenderer, not necessarily, that's something that you've got to manage as the department, even if it's not necessarily your fault. So I guess the question is, in producing this report, why weren't any of those concerns outlined in this report?
Some of those concerns are security related, so weaponry on vessels is a reason for concern in the public domain. So we summarised them as Commodore Jacobs did what the key driving issues were. They were technical in nature, they were safety and certification based concerns. We just didn't detail the specifics of the gun and the impact on that.
And did COVID-19 have anything to do with it?
It did, because we had staff couldn't work in the same way that they would normally work in a production yard, and that was the main driver for it.
Okay. Do you want to ask something?
Yeah. Well,
oh, you want yeah, okay, we can go. I've had my 10, have I?
Probably a bit more.
Okay. Deputy Chair, over to you.
Chair's not good of us.
No. This is why you're the Deputy Chair, my friend. Yeah. Go for it.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. Just want to follow on from that line of question from the Chair. So we have seen a significant shift in the number of projects that have been able to be sufficiently reported on as part of this process. There were 4 projects reported in 2021, and now there's only one of 21 projects have been able to be reported on. So I'm just trying to understand what's changed in terms of the strategic environment and the consideration of why that can't happen. So we saw that the 2020 Defence Strategy Update made the same strategic conclusions every year over the last 10-year window. So what is the rationale for a higher percentage of NFP details when in previous years many of these projects had less?
Deputy Chair, I might invite Major General Matt Pearce to provide that. He represents VCDF Group, who's responsible for making those security assessments.
And if you can, I've got quite a lot of questions, so if I could just get really succinct answers if I can. Thanks.
Deputy Chair, so there's a structured and professional assessment of our security requirements that definitely take into account the continued deterioration of our geostrategic circumstances, and also the capabilities that are publicly available, but also that our potential adversary militaries might have to be able to aggregate information. So the process is quite deliberate and structured in that subject matter experts will look at the capabilities that they're responsible for and deliberately make conscious choices around information to be released to make sure that we're not releasing something that will identify a capability gap in the ADF.
So is it the deterioration of the strategic environment, or is it the status of the projects themselves?
It's the geostrategic environment and the potential for our adversaries to be able to exploit a capability gap or understand where we might have vulnerabilities that they could exploit.
The Defence Secretary in his statement stressed that it was because of the strategic environment and used the 23-24 NPR commencement date as his point of reference. I'm just interested in drawing out, if you can please, and if you could explain the rationale and the difference here. When the NPR commenced, we had Australian troops actively deployed in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And can you explain what has changed and how is that different now to then that requires that extra classification of NFP material?
Deputy Chair, there's great power competition in our region, and the National Defence Strategy, the government direction to us through the National Defence Strategy, is to have credible capabilities to be able to deter the threat of coercion through military force and the potential for conflict in the region. So the capabilities that we're acquiring now are designed for a different requirement to working in a coalition on the other side of the world as part of the Middle East operations.
Can I ask, how many staff work on the ANAO compliance within Defence in preparing this report?
I can answer that question in a very broad context. Every project that is part of this review will have project teams supporting that, often in the order of about 3 people per project that would be actively gathering and working the PDSS, the project
So that would be
data.
across all 21?
All 21.
Okay.
We would have, those projects would be providing that data. They would be updating source data and correlating that data to meet the requirements of the ANAO and to provide the traceability for that data. I have a team of about 7 that supports more broadly the ANAO in the correlation of all of this data and the coordination with those particular groups. We've routinely said this costs us, I think, a combination of the ANAO and our teams about $10 million on an annual basis to collate the data that's in here. It is quite labour intensive. Yeah. Our systems that support the data are not as coherent as we would like, and they're not necessarily time correlated. So making sure that you have contemporary data at the point of publishing is a critical step, and that's a critical quality check that we have to do to meet the ANAO.
Do you have on hand with you now, and I'm happy for you to take it on notice if need be, the total head count? You've said 3 per project. Is it exactly 3 per? So if you could come back to me with the total head count working over a course of the year and the total man hours over the course of the year as well. Can I ask how many staff are working on major projects specifically, given its annual nature?
In CASG, and I'll refer to David from Naval Shipbuilding and Sustainment Group, I currently have 6,000 people, in the order of 6,000, some 3,000, just approaching 3,000 public servants. I have in the order of approaching 1,050 ADF and about 2,000, just a fraction over 2,000 contractors. The issue is that there are enabling capabilities plus delivery divisions. I can give you a breakdown by delivery division. They're the people that are specifically running those projects, but there is also enabling capability like procurement expertise that is shared across that.
So I may not have spoke clearly. I was asking about those who are involved in the report.
In the report, it varies.
In working on the major projects report.
Yeah. I will be able to give you a base number, but everybody on that project would be touched in some way, shape or form, depending on their specialist nature. The content in the PDSS spans project management, commercial, engineering, tech, material logistics. So we would be tapping into all of those people at various points in time, but probably on average about 3 people per project that would be engaged
and
in
can
that. Not full time.
Do you engage consultants or contractors?
Contractors would be engaged in some areas where they are a critical part of the team that's producing that, and they are often the people that are doing the transactional work, looking at data and otherwise. So yes, there would be some contractor aspects to that, but the majority of this will be through program managers and those critical teams providing that critical expertise for those projects and supporting the development of the PDSS.
Given the significant warnings that ASIO Director Mike Burgess warning of foreign actors attempting to gain classified information about defence projects, including AUKUS, what steps does Defence take to ensure that all of those staff are appropriately cleared and not exposed?
So all of the people that are working on the projects, each of the projects will have classification levels, would have a clearances appropriate to the work that they're undertaking. So we clear those individuals for the undertaking of that work and with appropriate clearances for that. We would then, depending on the classification of the work being undertaken, we will have people working on the Defence Protected Network, the Defence Secret Network, and sometimes at higher classifications as well. And so that goes hand in glove with the environment that we're using to store the data to undertake that project work and the people that are cleared to operate in those environments. But our security and estate group are responsible for the security clearing and vetting of those individuals that form part of that project team.
And how serious is the threat in defence eyes? If you could just explain briefly the concern of the threat that's before us. In terms of that point that Mr.
Senator,
was making.
I'll make a couple of comments. We probably don't have our personnel security experts here to answer in detail your question, but as Mr. Deeble said, people cannot get access to our systems unless they've got appropriate security clearances. They are constantly renewed. People with top secret clearances, there is an annual review process where people are reviewed by our AGS for area. Do we take the threat seriously? Absolutely. We require our industry partners to have suitable clearances as well. We're also running our Defence Industry Security Program, the DISP program, that ensures that all of our partners are also suitably secured in dealing both with defence but also where they need to have access to our both protected and secret networks.
So here we are, ANAO have done this report. We're as a committee charged with looking at it, providing oversight over it, and obviously critiquing it through this process. Given the manpower that's involved in both the ANAO and within Defence that's working on this report, and now we're in a situation where where 20 out of 21 projects can't be properly reported on. At the risk of sounding obtuse, which I'm genuinely, it's a genuine question, not being necessarily critical, but what's the point of this process if we can't actually really get down and get the oversight and transparency that would be required to properly scrutinise as a parliament this huge expenditure from the Commonwealth into defence?
Deputy Chair, I'd say probably it's the cumulative impact of all of that information being publicly available that is probably one of our principal concerns from a security perspective. The more of the information that is out in the public domain, obviously other players can have access to that information and develop a very fulsome picture of how the ADF is operating from a overall capability perspective. And I think, I think a very important question would be what is the focus around the major projects report? If it is going to, how is Defence going from a overall cost performance perspective, schedule and scope perspective, the three sort of main focus areas around project performance, I think probably where we have some concern is around some of the more detailed aspects around what's being delivered and when, not necessarily the global picture of how our overall performance is operating.
Can I ask the Chair, if I could just add one point. All of the classified data is provided to the ANAO. Yes. The issue then becomes how you provide transparency about those particular elements, and in particular how you may choose to do horizontal analysis across all projects around aspects like schedule, and whether that would give away. In a small number of projects, it is very easy when you publish some and not others to actually glean what that might mean. So this is a key issue for us working forward with the ANAO, and I've greatly appreciated the opportunity we've had to discuss this with the Auditor General.
So, and I'll ask the ANAO, you'd be aware that there's a bill before the Parliament at the moment to establish the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Defence, which will have the ability to hear evidence in secret, or whatever the terminology is. Do you see that there's maybe scope for, subject to the passing of that bill, for the major projects report inquiry to be referred to maybe that committee, so it's able to hear that evidence in secret, but still provide to the rest of the Parliament the assurance that while we obviously trust your work, and as we've heard today, you do get to see everything, but then we're shielded from it as a Parliament. Do you see that maybe that committee could be a vehicle to enable this, so that this really important function of oversight is able to be maintained?
There is no doubt an increasing tension between the need for transparency on the performance of Defence's acquisition program and national security concerns, particularly given heightened geopolitical risk. And we do see that the value of the MPR in its current form is compromised by that reduced transparency, as you've highlighted, with Defence increasingly marking information as not for publication. We are exploring ways in which we could provide the appropriate amount of transparency on performance with amendments to the MPR or different mechanisms for reporting. The possibility of the new Defence Committee is one way for further oversight of Defence's acquisition program with greater consideration of national security concerns. We produce reports and need to table them in the Parliament, and there is a different process for the Defence Committee. The Deputy Auditor General might want to explain how that works.
So it's a bill, so we're all speculating.
Yeah.
But it is modelled on the Parliamentary Joint Committee of Intelligence and Security. Our Act requires us to table our work in both Houses of Parliament. We can't table to another place under our current legislation.
So it would require, if we wanted that mechanism, it would require a change of the legislation.
Well, we do engage with the, I'll just say PJSIS, the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, by providing confidential briefings on our work. But it's largely what we would say in public. We actually manage our information closely too. What's NFP in here is Defence's decision. Differently, when we do a performance audit, for example, the Auditor General will consider exactly the issues that VCDF considers and make decisions about that, because we table in both Houses of Parliament. So we're watching the development of the potential committee, and also recognise that your own Act that establishes this committee requires that you review every Auditor General report. So there's a potential which way do we go on what as the Parliament considers the bill.
I think we might continue this theme, but I'm going to also give a chance for other members to ask questions. I'll go to Senator Dowling and then we'll go around the room.
Thanks, Chair. I will continue on this theme, actually. So the increased secrecy or different levels of transparency, I think, Mr Deeble, you referenced in your introduction that it's easier now to digest information more quickly than ever before through use of things like artificial intelligence. Is there any analysis that actually sits behind that? Because some of that technology has existed for quite a while now to be able to process information really quickly, and similarly there's nothing stopping humans also being able to process information, probably not as quickly, but can also scrutinise it in large teams pretty quickly too. So what actual analysis sits behind the decision for less transparency, more secrecy, and being justified by the use of things like artificial intelligence?
I think, Senator, the evidence that we've seen in the growing threat across multiple levels in terms of foreign interference, in terms of cyber threats, has been increasing exponentially. We work very closely with ASIO and other intelligence agencies in understanding what that threat is and the rate at which it is growing. In many cases we're seeing, industry and other aspects of defence networks that might have been attacked once every hour, now being attacked, hundreds of times within minutes. So the threat is definitely increasing. The foreign interference threat is definitely increasing. We trigger off ASIO and other agencies to be able to understand what that environment is and how that could be best utilised. Artificial intelligence now is at a scale that we haven't seen before. There have been mechanisms used by intelligence agencies in the past to be able to assess this, but now with artificial intelligence and the ability to work with big data at scale and infer from multiple sources, open source and otherwise, becomes the real challenge for us as we're moving forward. But I'll throw to Major General Pearce to add any more.
I was just going to suggest as well, there's a difference between using a computer system or indeed analysts to identify probability vice us actually publishing something and declaring. And so for us, the concern is really around as soon as something's declared, it identifies that there is a capability gap there because clearly we don't have something to do that function until the delivery date. And that is something that our adversaries can exploit because they are the things that we would try to exploit.
Similarly, I think there's an increasing trend of not declaring a final operational capability. Is that also justified by the reason you've said that we don't want to say how long it's going to be for us to obtain this capability, so adversaries don't pick up on it? But I guess the counter to that is it could be seen as a means of avoiding accountability for delays as well. So if you don't say when something's going to be done, how can it ever really be late or overdue? So how do you balance those two things?
The final operational capability piece from within defence is really around when we have that capability and able to bring it to effect. And yes, it's again about declaring when we're ready to go. So again, our adversaries would be looking at okay, they might have made an initial announcement, but clearly they're not ready to go because they haven't made that final publication yet. But I'd also refer back to Mr Deeble's comment that all information is shared at all classifications with the ANAO to try to achieve that transparency.
Okay.
And Senator, I think there's two aspects. There's those things that you declare openly because they are a deterrent effect, and there are those things that you may want to keep back because they are your warfighting edge. So the balance between those things that you declare because of the deterrent effect and the impact that may have, as opposed to those things that you would choose to keep close hold because that goes to your warfighting capability.
Okay. Something that the JCPAA has considered around acquisition governance in previous reports also and made a recommendation was that the Department of Defence updates internal governance to require decisions for projects to enter the project of interest or project of concern list in a timely manner, not taking more than 3 months between the decision and implementation. So has this been done?
Yes, Senator, that was done. So in February of 2023, as a consequence of the direction from the Minister for Defence Industry, Minister Pat Conroy, we updated that guidance. In October of 23, we made further adjustments to tighten up the requirement to ensure escalation from what we call watch list, which is where the divisional heads will be having a list of projects, to projects of interest, to then projects of concern. So we have that escalation process clearly articulated in the policy that came out in February 23 and subsequently amended in October 23.
Okay. Final question. I think you've made some remarks in your submission that you think the NPR should be a bit more consistent with what our allies do in this space. So could you just reflect on that? Are you suggesting it should be simpler and shorter and in terms of some of the oversight that we do compared to what our allies do?
I think the discussions that we're having with the ANAO have been very fruitful, and we appreciate the opportunity to discuss how to do this analysis. I think some of the analysis I inferred before, summing delays across multiple projects to come up with 442 months, makes for very good press, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the delays more fulsomely across those projects. For example, if you remove 3 of those top projects, many of them projects of concern, so we know that they are serial offenders in terms of schedule slippage, removing those reduces that by 50%, in the order of 50%. So the other projects, that takes you, if you have a look within the report, it talks about 25 months on average delay down to about 12 months if you remove those outliers. So this is the area that we really want to work very closely with the ANAO. What is meaningful? I can't use 442 months to go and focus on how am I going to go after programmatic or project management issues. What I need to see is each of those individual projects understand the underpinning of why they are delayed. And we want to work very closely with the ANAO because that becomes much more meaningful. Transparency is not about the volume of data, it's about the accuracy of the data and whether that can be understood by the audience that is reading that. You will note, and I do apologise up front, that we're acronym city in defence. We have more acronyms than you can poke a stick at, and I hope we educate you slowly through that. But equally, it's quite complex what we do. And I think that Matt alluded to the fact that we don't just deliver, a ship tied up alongside a wharf or a tank sitting, in a field somewhere or an aircraft sitting on a tarmac. We deliver capability made up of fundamental inputs to capability. The complexity of what we do, both from a technical perspective and how we bring together all of those elements of capability, so when we declare full operational capability, that is deployable and can be utilised by government to its fullest extent. So these are the issues we've got. We deliver complex capability, and trying to capture all of that dimension of complexity, understanding where those critical drivers are of schedule performance, noting that we perform pretty well from a financial perspective. An example of that being that we haven't had in recent major projects report real cost increases. We tend to stay within our approved budget in that regard, and we deliver 94.5%, I think it's called out. But when you look at that underpinning data, we deliver the capability outcomes in the majority of cases. Schedule is the biggest driver for us. So how do we go after that? How does the major project report provide insights into why that schedules are late? Not in aggregate, but in a way that helps us, helps the Parliament and helps the public understand what are the critical aspects of the complex capability we deliver in defence.
Mr. Deeble, you would have been a fine essay writer at school. You managed to pull all that very, very eloquently together. But maybe just for the purposes of ensuring that we get to all members, if we can go a little bit shorter, that would be great. Senator?
I want to see if the Auditor General had any remarks around how the MPRs compare with other jurisdictions.
Yes, and I might hand over to Ian Goodwin to talk about the UK and the US, but maybe just first on this point about the 442 months and the aggregate slippage. I mean, we agree that that number alone doesn't provide a full and fully meaningful assessment of schedule performance. It is a valid indicator, but a meaningful assessment would break down the different projects that contribute to the 442 aggregate, and we would have more analysis of those projects and which ones had varied because there was a change to the scope, which ones had varied because there was an event that happened, which ones had varied because of challenges, problems in project management and the like. But we're unable to do that now because of the not-for-publication. So hence we have this tension. Our allies face the same tension. And I don't think anyone has the definitive answer to dealing with it yet. But there are different approaches, and Ian can speak to that.
Thank you. Just for context also on the question of not-for-publication, I think it's important also just to note that the MPR guidelines, which the committee commissioned, actually puts the responsibility on Defence to present the information at an unclassified level. So what's been done, in a sense, is consistent with the guidelines. In terms of what we observe overseas, we obviously engage with other Supreme Audit institutions, and in this case the UK and the US, on the major projects report. And the issues that we're talking about here are not unique to Australia. They parallel in those jurisdictions. In the UK National Audit Office produced a major projects report until 2015, after which it was replaced by what was called the Defence Equipment Plan. That plan ceased in 2023, and the UK Ministry of Defence intends to publish a Defence Investment Plan. So it would appear to be somewhat similar to the IIP in Australia by December of this year, 2025. And the UK National Audit Office is transitioning to audit that Defence Investment Plan. In terms of, and in addition to that, the UK National Audit Office does value for money, similar to our performance audits of defence acquisition projects. In the US, the Government Accountability Office, our peer, has published an annual weapons systems assessment, which is somewhat similar to Australia's MPR. Probably the thing to note, though, is that in 2021, that report introduced a new category called middle tier acquisition, which sort of aligns to the concept of minimal viable capability introduced by the NDS. The issue to draw out there is that there are unique differences sometimes between MVC, minimum viable capability, and FOC, which has required the GAO to split their reporting out to 2 reports.
Ms Aldred, online.
Very much. I've got a couple of questions. Can I just walk back to some of the responses that you gave on consultants and contractors working with Defence on the reports and the issue around classifications. Security clearances and classifications being bottlenecked or held up to such a degree that that's having an impact on the other work that we're discussing today?
Ms Aldred, yes, it is. The demand for clearances is increasing significantly, and especially for demand for higher classification levels, is an issue. Our AGSFA organisation, unfortunately, Security and Estate Group's not represented here today, has increased the number of clearances that are being undertaken. They have to be prioritised necessarily in that regard. Any contractor working on our programs, though, will be at that security level, and that we do ensure that the security and the networks in which they're operating on, they hold the security clearances for that.
And if I may,
thank you.
And sorry, if I can just add to that, having just recently read the AGSFA annual report, I think the advice there was that, as Mr Deeble alluded to, yes, they've had the most demand for clearances, but likewise AGSFA met all of its performance indicators around delivery of those security clearances in the 24-25 financial year.
Thank you. Defence has reported that all 21 projects in this year's NPR would continue to operate within the total approved budget of $81 billion. So my question is it Defence's evidence that all major projects have sufficient funding for completion against their delivery schedules?
The assessment in the 23-24 report against budget would indicate that those projects are estimating that their final budget will stay within that approved budget. That does mean that we may still call on contingency, which is part of government approval for those projects, and we are seeing some pressures on our budgets around indexation, inflationary factors and other things. But at this juncture, in this report, we've identified that we anticipate that we will stay within the budget. That can change, though, due to a number of reasons, project performance and other factors, but for this report, that is the indicator.
And Chair, just one more question, please. Noting the significant underspends and overspends against the Defence portfolio budget statement profiles, can you walk us through Defence's costing processes and, I guess, what practice is leading to such a substantial underspend on some projects and such a significant overspend on others?
I'll have a go. Certainly our costing approaches for projects to be approved by government, they've gone through what we call a second pass approach, which normally entails going to the market to get tender quality costs around the costings. From year to year, there are project schedule issues that may be driven by industry performance. There might be timing things that could move deliverables and expenditure from one year to the next, and that might only be a couple of months' worth of delay, but will still show up as a financial year underspend in the preceding year. That'll get picked up. Obviously, the approved projects that are approved by government are over the life of those projects. As in my normal role of CFO, yes, we expect projects to be budgeting on an annual basis so that we can meet the overall annual defence budget, but there are instances where projects slip, or there could be instances where projects need to accelerate deliverables and expenditure based on delivery performance. One of the big challenges we have across many of our projects that are reliant on foreign military sales, particularly predominantly with the United States. Yes, we can see changes moving by the foreign military sales area and delivery within the US markets that mean we have to adjust our annual budgets, and we'll see ups and downs on an annual basis. Our challenge is how do we manage that across the whole of the portfolio of over 250 approved projects to ensure that we're still managing the overall defence budget as well.
That's it from me, Chair. Thank you.
I'll hand back to the Deputy Chair and then I'll come back after that.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I note on page 45, paragraph 184, it says that in June 2024, the JCPWA reported that contingency funding had been a consistent issue across previous MPRs and continues to persist. Can you tell me how many projects of concern are currently resorting to using their contingency funding, and if you could let us know as well if this is, if this use of contingency funding is different to previous periods?
I'll talk about that in two ways. So to answer your question succinctly around the projects of concern, it would be highly unlikely that they wouldn't be calling on contingency. They are projects of concern because there has been delay. That means that risks have probably been realised, and therefore you would be calling on contingency. So in the main, I think projects of concern will have contingency calls. And that can be for a number of reasons: technical, additional work that might needed to be undertaken or otherwise. I think that calls on contingency, what we've seen post-COVID is increasing inflationary factors that weren't predicted at the start of those projects. They are becoming more critical. We're seeing supply chain issues. They can often go to cost, delays in delivery of those particular aspects, and other factors. So yes, the calls on contingency, there are many factors, and we are seeing a growth of those, in particular around supply chain and inflationary factors.
I will come back to the inflationary factors in a moment, or maybe one of my colleagues will. But just sticking with this contingency funding, has Defence taken steps to reduce the use of contingency funding on major projects since the Defence Strategic Update in 2020 and the Defence Strategic Review in 2023?
So, Deputy Chair, we, in managing contingency, as the ANAO report outlines, it is approved by government, but we don't actually allocate it out internally within the projects. We hold it centrally against the project, but not within a financial year, allocated over the life of the project. And yes, we have processes whereby areas that want to access the contingency for their project need to come centrally into the CFO area, which gets both assessed and approved. There was a strengthening of that process over the last couple of years, driven by sort of some budget reforms that were requested by government to tighten our financial management around some of the projects. So there is a strengthening of the process. We still approve contingency. It's not an overly common event, but there is a process that we put in place to ensure that the estimates, the reason for the contingency is aligned with what was initially costed as part of the project, i.e. the contingent event has occurred. So yes, we've put improved governance around it.
The report details the fact that there's been about a 21% increase in slippage. Has Defence taken steps to reduce slippage since the Defence Strategic Update in 2020 and the Defence Strategic Review in 2023?
Yes, slippage is an issue associated with many projects. Most projects, what you plan at the start, there will be things that will change when that project might deliver. And as you work through the process of reviews and those particular projects, slippage is not an unusual thing that can be experienced on projects. What we are doing is strengthening our scheduling capability. That's a critical skill in a project management context. We take and assess the contractor master schedules and make sure that they're executable. We also then look at, I referred to before, fundamental inputs to capability. We have to align all of those fundamental inputs to capability to the contractor master schedule. So CASG and delivery groups like NSSG and GUIO will be looking at all of those elements and supporting capability managers in bringing those elements together. Scheduling is the area that we're putting a lot of effort into. Sitting next to the Acting Associate Secretary, but also the CFO in his day job, finances flow from a good schedule. If you've got your schedule right, then your financial performance is right. So being able to assess our schedules, look at that probabilistically, apply Monte Carlo analysis, we're trying to strengthen all of that and the tools that underpin watching a project slippage, the schedule slip, financial performance being adjusted.
So is that still a work in progress? Because it hasn't seemed to have worked yet. Like there's a 20% growth in or increase in slippage. So are you hoping that reduces that down? The measures you're taking now are going to reduce that? Or?
Yes, they will, and that combined with professionalisation becomes a critical aspect of it. So building the skill sets to be able to manage a good schedule, establish a good schedule, be able to divine the financial performance that underpins that is a really critical thing. So we're going after that through increased professionalisation of our project managers and the skills that underpin that to get better schedules. It is important to note, though, when you look at that 21%, if you remove some of those projects of concern from that data, we'd be down around 10%. So the outliers, and CMAT's program, for example, is described in the NPR correctly at being 87 months late. That is a project of concern. We know that is continuing to be late. The schedule performance on other projects is very good. So it's the balance that needs to be struck here. And what we've got to do is set projects up for success with the right financial estimates and the right schedule. So that's the criticality.
Delays in project slippage is consequential, isn't it? And it, given the threat environment, it could be even more consequential. It's not imaginary. Has the Minister at all queried Defence, the slippage issues with Defence?
Minister for Defence Industry, Minister Conroy and the DPM remain very concerned about schedule performance. The work that we're doing now about more agile ways of delivering is really the focus. The National Defence Strategy in 2024 said that our acquisition and sustainment processes, procurement processes, weren't fit for purpose. We're now looking at how we can do that in a more agile way as we're moving forward, and we're developing that policy, and we've implemented that in some projects as well. So agile approaches, how we approach continuous capability development and delivery, how we consider minimal viable capability within that, so we're not seeking perfection, We're seeking operational outcomes much more rapidly to be able to evolve the threat. So
the
we are
ANA
approaching that differently.
Sorry, didn't quite.
And we are approaching the speed to capability differently.
Can I ask the ANAO, in your view, are you seeing that Defence is taking this as a priority in addressing slippage and making sure that projects are delivered on time?
Yes, so I'll just...
If we look at aggregate slippage, then it's been roughly constant. We've seen some improvement over a longer period of time, and we certainly have observed some of the efforts that the Deputy Secretary has been highlighting. We nonetheless still see that there are significant delays, and slippage has only changed very slightly from last year.
Sorry. I was just going to add, I think it's a fair comment to say that there's been a real focus on slippage. Okay. There is a table within the NPR report that talks about in-year slippage reducing, but also it's probably fair to reflect that within the project reporting and the governance arrangements that go to project management, there have been efforts to centralise and standardise risk reporting through the tool Predict. Within Defence, there's been increased compliance reviews that focus on project governance and life cycle management processes within Defence. And the Lessons Governance Board, while it was subject to a qualification last year, has had a focus around addressing the issue of slippage.
Can I ask, how's Defence approach to major projects changed, specifically since the decision by Defence to adopt a priority on minimum viable capability?
Yes, Senator, we are changing. I alluded to looking at continuous capability development and delivery. The work under the National Defence Strategy and the Integrated Investment Plan that occurred in the 2024 timeframe took some 600 projects and condensed those down to programs of work. We now have 280 programs that are being progressed in that regard, and we will be applying this notion of minimal viable capability to every project as it's progressing and going forward.
With that, what was the word you used? Consolidation or rationalisation?
Continuous capability development and delivery.
In bringing it down, has there been a rescoping?
We've condensed, many projects into programs of work, which we will apply continuous capability development and delivery approaches to, using minimal viable.
Has that rescoped any of the major projects at all, that work?
Not to any of the extant projects, but this is clearly the path forward for unapproved projects as we're moving forward, and would be then subject to consideration through the investment committee as we look at progressing and approving those projects.
If I can add, pivoting towards minimum viable capability doesn't change the methodical approach to schedule management and risk management. Those are fundamental underpinnings irrespective of the time frame by which you want to achieve a certain capability. So I don't think it's changed our risk management posture. It hasn't changed our focus on those strategic risks that impact schedule. And as pointed out by ANAO, that's a clear focus for us is to make sure we're using the risk management tools, and Deputy Secretary Kaz G mentioned that we're upskilling our professionalism, and one of those key areas is around risk management.
And to the point that Mr Goodwin made, so as we're looking at minimal viable capability, being prepared to compromise on the capability to get something quickly, we are looking at minimal viable process. That's part and parcel of agile thinking, but we're not looking at minimal viable governance. So as Mr Goodwin said, working in an agile way, working much more rapidly, requires more discipline in many regards, and it requires good governance. And as the ANAO has highlighted a number of times in their reviews, very good record-keeping, decision-making and record-keeping that would underpin that.
Are any of the projects that have been rescoped, are any of them subject to the not-for-publication
The projects that we're talking about rescoping are in the Integrated Investment Plan unapproved at this point in time. Some of the projects that we already have underway...
You'll have to explain that to me, sorry.
Sorry?
You'll have to explain what that means.
So there's approved projects which has been subject to appropriation, and consideration by government, and there's unapproved projects, which is the hopper, if you like, of projects that are coming down the stream.
The ones that are being rescoped.
Sorry?
The ones that are being rescoped, were they once approved but have now gone into an
We have
unapproved
approved a number of projects that we're bringing into this programmatic approach, but it's early days as we start to consider the ongoing development of that into time. Continuous capability development and delivery, very simply, is a way of getting a capability to the field much more rapidly and then evolving that incrementally over time. You need to do that to take account of new technology and new threats. So the way in which we're considering some of the legacy programs, approved programs, that haven't been brought through this mechanism as they get approved, is actually thinking about what that means. So getting something to the field fast, speed to capability is important, but then how it gets subsequently modified incrementally over time to take account of threat, to take account of technology, is the work that's underway. And that's critical to meeting our intent under the National Defence Strategy and the underpinning Integrated Investment Plan.
I might jump in there and sort of change the direction a little bit, but we definitely can come back to transparency and other components. On the Battlefield Command System, there was a stop work issued to L3 Harris Communications Australia. Can you talk us through that?
I'd like to invite Major General Richard Vagg and the First Assistant Secretary for Joint Systems, who's responsible for running that project, to the table. Gavin Rawlins.
Good morning. Gavin Rawlins, First Assistant Secretary, Joint Systems. Land 200 Phase 2. Stop payment. I apologise. Would you mind just repeating just the...
Sure.
So I'm going to focus the answer.
And for this, do we have another name thing so I can...
Oh, I apologise.
Is that available?
Okay. Sorry.
No, don't be silly. Thank you, Mr. Rawlins. So there was a stop payment issued on... you can give me the date. I'm just going to find it in the report. Otherwise, after the original contract was budgeted, there was a stop payment issued in, what was it, the year 2020? 2022 or 3 or something?
2022.
2022. Yeah. So do you mind talking through why there was a stop payment?
Yes. Some context just on the project just might help, just as the prequel for that. The Battlefield Command System had two components, two major things. A battle management system delivered by Elbit, and then a tactical communications network by L3 Harris. Both of these things suffered through delays of schedule and of design development and so forth. For the TCN that was being delivered through L3 Harris, there was concerns of schedule and then of acceptance being taken place. In order to alleviate that, there was a decision to stop payment to the company until we resolved the manner in which to rectify that. That was a quite professional process between Defence and the company. We rectified that as quickly as we could. We then went into a deed of reduction and release. We then modified with a CCP, and then we then continued with the delivery of those components.
So the reduction and release deed, what did that involve?
So that was in May 2024. So that was an examination of where we needed to modify that particular line of effort and schedule to then determine what was best for the delivery. It followed with a CCP.
And was there any reduction in what actually was being delivered?
So along that line of effort, technically there were the development of a waveform So a radio waveform was a portion of that, and then a delivery of radios to actually sort of join together and deliver the capability. It was determined that it wasn't viable to continue with the R&D effort of the waveform, so there was a reduction not to deliver that anymore. A sensible decision as the world had moved on in terms of that, so the right decision to sort of cease and modify the trajectory of that.
So the original budget of almost $311 million included the waveform, but then there was a stop payment put on, the waveform was taken out. Did the total cost go down at all?
Yes, as that component wasn't required to be worked on and delivered more, yes, there was a reduction. I don't have that figure exactly here to tell you what that is. I can take that on notice to grab that if you would like.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay. And then you also mentioned the delays or the issues around Albert as well. What were they?
So Albert was contracted to deliver the battle management system. Again, scheduled performance there, just in terms of what they were required to deliver, and then move through what's called system acceptance. So they'll design, develop, achieve an architecture that needs to be then accepted into defence. That was being delayed. The determination was then made that that wasn't sort of logical to continue, so there was a process put in place. Again, a deed of settlement and release was entered into quite professionally with Albert, a contract change proposal, so on and so forth, to then enable us to then move forward, deliver the components that we needed to, and then to enable Army to move on with other things.
So what was not in the original contract that you had with Albert that you had to sort of say, well, let's stop there and we'll just move on?
Major General Richard Vagg, Headland Capability, Australian Army. We started the digitisation journey of Army in about 2010. At that stage, software and hardware came together. They were linked. We were really early adopters to this type of capability. Over the 8 to 9 years as we introduced the battle management system, technology moved on, and all of a sudden it was all about applications being mounted on the hardware. We learned a number of lessons through both Land 200 Phase 1 and Land 200 Phase 2. The decision was made in early 2020 to cease the ongoing work of the battle management system because we'd effectively hit a technological cul-de-sac. We couldn't integrate it onto our platforms. It was becoming more and more expensive, and we knew that the way technology was going was in a different direction, whereas open architectures, standardised compute with applications mounted onto the systems, and that was that decision made in early 2020, and we've now transitioned onto a different type of system.
So I'm just trying to understand, so from that, and thank you both for those answers, so the original budget was for Albert $370 million, but as technology evolved, there was a decision made to end that system. And then for L3 Harris, there was a stop work, a reduction in what you actually were being delivered by L3 Harris, and a reduction in what they were actually delivering. And yet the total expenditure of what the whole project was included went from $930 million to $972 million. So what happened where we were getting, you know, an evolution of technology from Albert that wasn't applicable and a reduction in capability from L3 Harris that cost us an extra $42 million on top of what we originally budgeted?
So, Chair, if I could just refer you to page 219, the move from $930 million to $972.5 million was due to exchange rate variation, was part of that. I believe, and we will take it on notice to come back to you and describe, because this was at a point in time when we were undergoing the settlements. I'd also refer you to the assessment of capability was an assessment at time. So that's on page 224, where we've described the extent of capability that we were confident about, that is subject to review and consideration. I'd note that this was subject to a qualification by the ANAO because at the time we were in the middle of settlements and working that through with both Albert and L3 Harris in particular. The measures of things, just to highlight to you, that use of stop payment is a standard contractual mechanism that we would use if we're not seeing the performance, we're concerned about technical outcomes being achieved, and watching these things play out. So in both cases, you know, as you'd normally see, we're reliant on industry performance, and both of these had aspects of industry performance and technology evolution and the requirement changing. But we will take that on notice and provide you with an indication of how much we've actually expended and saved as a consequence of those two deeds of settlement.
Can I just ask a question on that though? Thank you. The exchange variation, do you mind just expanding that for the committee?
So when there are elements, both of these, so in particular with L3 Harris, you're buying component parts, radios from the US.
Yeah.
So you're paying in US dollars for those items.
I understand.
If the exchange rate between Australia and the US changes, then that could be a windfall gain from a budgetary perspective, or it could be more money. I'm certain the CFO can describe no win, no loss in exchange rate terms.
So, Chair, we get supplemented. Our overall budget, including right down at a project level, varies based on exchange movements, and we flow that right through to changes to project budgets.
Understand. Thank you. So,
Follow-up question
please.
to that? Yeah, just, I mean, obviously, because there is a dominance of international primes in defence industry, exchange rate fluctuations must be business as usual for you guys.
Yes.
So what is your hedging, I mean, do you have a hedging strategy? I mean, I know you index for inflation risk, but what do you do for exchange rate risk?
Senator, as I said, and Mr Deeble alluded to, each budget update, our overall budget varies based on the combination of all of those foreign exchange movements.
But who is that put together by? Is it expertise in your own department? Is it someone else that... do you have a function that manages exchange rate risk?
By the time the projects have been approved, we know what we're buying from whom and whether there is a foreign exchange impact. The negotiation, it's an automatic process that we do with Department of Finance based on information within our financial management systems that then either sees an increase or a decrease to the overall defence budget for those, I guess, across the whole package of all of those foreign exchanges that we're exposed to.
Right. So there's no one in defence that's managing exchange. It's Department of Finance that is doing.
We're tracking the movements,
yeah,
and then the supplementation process or reduction to our budget is negotiated with Department of Finance.
Right.
An indicator of the scale for these particular projects has been identified by the ANAO on table S4, page 19. That talks about $40.9 billion worth of increased funding that's coming into these projects. $5 billion was identified in exchange rate variation across these projects that are represented in the MPR. So that gives you an order of magnitude scale across all of the projects that we're talking about.
So I'm just trying to understand the process here. So the budget at second pass approval, what's that? What's the second pass approval stage?
That's when we transition a phase of a project from unapproved to approved. That's on the basis of us taking second pass quality costings and business cases to government for their ultimate approval. Right. At that point, it becomes, in our language, an approved project.
Got it. And then you've got the total approved budget. What's that?
Well, that's the amount that the government has agreed for that particular component of the project or the overall project. It may have subsequent tranches to that project that have not been considered by government. So a particular project may have aspects of approved, because we've taken it to government, or amounts that are still provisioned within the IIP as unapproved that we still need to go through those formal processes and approvals with government.
So I'm just trying to understand, so thank you very much, that's very useful. So I'm just trying to understand, so Defence has the second pass approval, here's the scope of the projects, Albert's doing this, L3 is doing this, and then as that happens, we make a decision, actually the communications at Albert is no longer fit for purpose, and L3 is, there's a whole range of issues going on there, and we're actually stopping them. I don't understand why the budget doesn't get altered at all, even when the payments get stopped.
So, as the Acting Associate Secretary said, on page 219, where you were looking at that budget of 972.5, that table down the bottom gives you the remaining budget. So the point at which we've done these negotiations and we've settled with both L3 Harris and with Albert, we won't be expending that money, and that would then go back accordingly. So the total appropriation from government at approval is the 930, subject to exchange rate is the additional 42. We've only spent 183, and subject to the negotiation, this next look at this particular project would see the residual money that would then return as a consequence of those settlements.
Got it. So $183 million is going to be...
It's still to be spent and would be subject to those negotiations and would be updated if this, I think this is going into the next review from memory. So you would see this in the 24-25. You would see the final amount of money that was unexpended, having done those settlements with L3 Harris and Albert.
So actually, for the purposes of this, is it not worth for the sort of MPR, disclosure, talking about how much is actually, the change of scope or the change of the project and the final budget as a result of that? I mean, is that not worth sort of reporting on?
I think in this particular case, in the 23-24 timeframe, we were still negotiating with L3 Harris, so it was very difficult for us to assess that. What you see in the assessment of capability being delivered on page 224 was an estimate at the time, and this was subject to a qualification from ANAO because we were in the middle of that settlement and could not assess the final outcome of the settlement deed.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing here is a point in time. Subsequently here in 24-25, you would see this project, if reported, would give you a definitive answer on exactly what the final expenditure was as we did the settlement and paid out the final elements of those projects, and you would see a residual amount left as a consequence of that settlement deed.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense to you.
If I may, our normal process would be that we would not get rid of any remaining budget until we've completely closed out a project or we've had a decision from government. So that's why, as Mr Deeble said on that table on page 219, you can see the total expenditure against the original budget. You can see the remaining budget that's been approved by government, but there would need to be that subsequent step for us to extinguish that remaining budget.
And that doesn't get sort of, that back and forth doesn't, like Defence doesn't say, actually, we're going to try and negotiate down, where, like, you can, there's $183 million that we estimate, or you would have estimations about what you think you might have available at the end of a project. How does that kind of work between back and forth within Defence and government around if you are renegotiating the scope of a contract?
I think there's two parts to the equation. The first part is the negotiation with the industry partner. That then determines exactly what will or won't be delivered. If we've got technical risk that's been realised, and in particular with the waveform that was identified with L3 Harris, we removed that element of scope, subject then to a negotiated outcome as to what that meant. Should we pay anything? Had there been any work undertaken in the development of that? If there was no work, we wouldn't pay for that, and we would excise that from whatever that final settlement is. The next part of the update is we do keep government updated as we're undertaking those settlement deeds. We'd identify it through, and this was a project of interest, so that through that process we identify the fact that we've had these issues and we're addressing them, and then we keep government updated as we go through the process and when we've achieved a final settlement outcome. The reporting here is done year on year, so this was a point in time. Rightly, the ANAO did qualify this particular aspect because at the point in time we were in the middle of those settlements.
And does the ANAO have any... Thank you, it makes perfect sense. Does the ANAO have any views on the sort of process of how those settlements are conducted and the overall sort of... that'll be my first question. Any comments broadly, but any comments on the specifics of how those settlements are negotiated between defence and industry?
Yep. So perhaps Chair could start with the broad and just start with where Mr. Deeble left it around the qualification, because the qualification was in the previous year for 22-23, and that's outlined on page 120 of that report. The qualification related to inconsistency in the evidence that we were reviewing versus what was in the PDSS. I think an interesting thing to draw out there, it goes to the earlier point that we get all of the information, and if notwithstanding not for publication, and if we see an inconsistency in that information, then we would call it out, and that's what happened in 22-23, because it was also subject to not for publication. That project remains in 23-24. The qualification was removed around the fact that those matters that have been talked to were able to be settled, and so we didn't have that inconsistency in the information that we were reviewing. And it remains in the 24-25 review, but at this point that review is ongoing.
So Chair, can I just add, this report, our work on this report is limited assurance. So we do see everything, but we don't dive in the same way we do in a performance audit. So in respect of Mr Goodwin's evidence, and he's talking about what we saw and how it lined up in the PDSS. If Ms Wilmot, who does performance audits in Defence, did a deep dive, she would look at, in the normal course of a procurement audit, the negotiation strategies, the outcomes of it and whatnot. So this isn't the report that gives us that.
Yeah, I see. I'm going to go to Ms Aldred and then we'll keep going.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't mind going back to the foreign exchange issue, and I'm just looking at page 20 where it refers to price indexation, material and labour net to July 2010, $0.4 billion exchange variation, foreign exchange net to 30 June 2024, $5 billion. According to the report, indexation accounted for just $4 billion in uplift in defence variation spending, so just 0.95% of the $40.2 billion in spending variation. This was at a time when inflation ran at 3.8%. At the same time, the exchange rate accounted for $5 billion, or 12.2%. I'm just wondering if Defence can explain why the exchange rate exposure is so much higher than the impact of materials and labour inflation.
I would say our funding is tied, and when we have approved project funding, the inflation estimates that are included in those are based on a standard set of parameters that we use. We do not vary project budgets for inflation. It may be a reason that drives access to contingency that a project might require, but the idea of having a second pass quality costing that gets approved by government is that we have used, in developing that costing, the best available estimates of inflation. And like I said, where that does vary, that may be a cause for access to contingency, but not in all circumstances. And I would also say that our budget does not get constantly varied by government for inflation in the same way that it does for foreign exchange. Hence why that $5 billion figure for foreign exchange is very explicit, because they are adjustments to our budget that are done sort of each budget cycle twice, if not 3 times a year.
Right. The 400 figure appears low, I suppose, given inflation was at 3.8% over that year.
Yep.
Can you give us some detail on how that was calculated?
I might need to get a hand from a colleague, but I think that price indexation component was a very old methodology used prior to 2010, before we moved to, I guess, the current arrangements that we're operating under. But Mr. Webber might be able to help me with that.
Graham Webber, First Assistant Secretary, Financial Performance and Management. That is correct. Mr. Groves outlined there's a number of projects in the MPR that existed prior to 2010. In those earlier years, we would be indexing those projects respectively. Since then, we fully outturned the complete integrated investment program, so there was no need to do annual indexation updates.
Can you tell us what the average price indexation was across major projects?
I think we would have to take that on notice, but as Mr. Webber said, that the reference in that table to price indexation is for some very old projects, not subject to the current arrangements. But on what we use generally, it would be dependent upon what we're acquiring, what market we're acquiring, and we then have access to a range of wage price indices and such that we use in outturning the estimates for each of the approved projects through that second pass process that I mentioned before, that we take for government approval.
My colleague Senator Hume has asked a little bit about currency risks and the way you approach that, and I'm interested in how Defence approaches inflation risk and currency risks in its contracts. Has that changed across the time that the 21 major projects in this review have been commissioned?
No, I don't believe it has. We as an organisation, a public sector organisation in the Commonwealth, we're not able to hedge against foreign exchange risk, and hence why we have the arrangements whereby, as I mentioned, foreign exchange changes are constantly adjusted in our both in our overall funding for defence, but that is then also flowed down to individual projects. So in some ways that alleviates the need for us to be hedging against that foreign exchange risk.
And Ms Aldred, from a contracting perspective, when we sign with industry, we agree those rates. They are the rates that the Acting Associate Secretary described are considered in our estimates of what those projects would cost. Industry would hedge against some of those variations in their bids into us in that regard. So they bear the risk of those indexation changes as a consequence of the contract indices agreed at that time.
I understand. Through the Chair, do you think you'd be able to take on notice what contractual approaches are taken to manage those risks across each of those projects?
Happy to take that on notice.
Thank you. And Chair, I have one more, if I may.
You may.
So I'm just looking at the Civil Military Air Traffic Management System project financial assurance statement, where it notes there's insufficient budget remaining, including contingency, for the project to complete, taking into account changes that resulted from the implementation of the project of concern. That's paragraph 1.35, page 33. If that's the case, why then did the ANAO find that the Civil Military Air Traffic Management System did not? Were there any consequences of failing to deliver that program?
So I'll start, Ms Aldred, and then pass over to Air Vice Marshal David Schul, who's responsible for the project. The Civil Military Air Traffic Control System is done in collaboration with Air Services Australia. They are the contracting authority and the contract management. We work with them through a joint project office and have visibility of that particular project. But in terms of the risks and what's been realised, I think this is a very complex capability that we're delivering. Globally, there is no other system like this to cover 10% of the Earth's airspace in that regard, and the mix of civil military has not been done to the extent. But I'll let Air Vice Marshal Schul answer your question.
So, apologies, would you mind repeating your question?
No problem, sir. The Civil Military Air Traffic Management System project financial assurance statement notes that there's insufficient budget remaining, including contingency, for the project to complete, taking into account changes that resulted from the implementation of the project of concern remediation plan. So that's at page 33. So I'm looking at two things. If that's the case, then why did ANAO find that the Civil Military Air Traffic Management System didn't? And if that's the case also, what were the consequences of failing to deliver that program?
I wouldn't like to speak for the ANAO, but what I would say is that statement that says that the project assesses it has insufficient funds at the moment is primarily due to the costs associated with the delay to that program and the work that we are doing to remediate and ensure the capability of our current in-service traffic management system. That is a system that we need to now ensure maintains its ability to provide air traffic services through the period of the delay that we hadn't forecast previously. Because that is, we are needing to do that because of the delay to the program, this project is now providing funding to the in-service part of the organisation to assure that the in-service capability. So you'll also note that there's statements in the PDS about, in this particular financial year, that that the project has expended contingency funds on conducting what we're calling the Capability Assurance Program for the air traffic management system. So all of those things combined mean that at this, the statement that was made for the financial year in the MPR was that the project is assessing the fact that it does not currently have sufficient approved budget to ensure the delivery of the entirety of the program. Since that time, work has been done to assess exactly what that means, and we've been working closely with Air Force and CFO's organisation about exactly what that will mean, and in order to assure the delivery of the project and to finalise delivery of the project, we will do. The project is doing certain things to, one, assure that we are correctly costing and have allocated correct budget appropriately to cover all of the capabilities we need to deliver. And if we are short, what does that mean and how we would then need to approach government to potentially ask for more budget.
And Ms Aldred, if I could just add a little bit to that. This project was subject to a real cost increase back in the 2017-18 timeframe. At the time that Air Services Australia had negotiated a contract with Thales. There is an arrangement, a contracted arrangement between Air Services Australia and Defence that has some cost aspects to it, and the extent of a real cost increase, so this project could be subject to a second real cost increase, is still subject to working through what that means and what element of that delay and the additional cost will be borne by the Commonwealth through either ASA or through Defence. So we're still at that point of being able to finalise that. But I think it is correctly characterised by Air Vice Marshal Schul in terms of the work that we need to do to keep our extant systems, our extant air traffic control systems on Defence bases serviceable through that period of time. That takes cost, because we had otherwise envisaged that we would be, if this project had been delivered on time, we would have taken those systems out of service.
All right. Well, thank you to you and the Air Vice Marshal. Chair, that's all I've got.
Thank you. How come the Australian Industry Capability Plan for the Hunter frigate was only published in April, not November, as was originally suggested to the ANAO?
Can you just repeat the question?
Sure. Defence advised the ANAO in September 2024 that the contractor for the Hunter-class frigate had submitted a plan that is undergoing review and will be published in November 2024. This, I'm just reading from page 43 of the report, down the bottom in the footnote. Defence advised the ANAO in October 2024 that I'll come back to that. So, yeah, Defence said that it was going to be published in November and then it was published in April. I'm just wondering why it was 6 months over. Down the bottom, page 43, footnote 116. Very, very last little sentence, no worries. And then I'm looking at the website, the Defence website, and then it's got that on the 28th of April, the Hunter-class frigate program was published.
I have to take it on notice why there was a delay with that particular report. So.
No worries. And then the ANAO in October, Defence advised the ANAO in October that the combat reconnaissance vehicles is in the process of publishing its ARC plans. Is that, are they ready?
Chair, I think Major General Jason Blaine is online.
I'm just trying to unmute, thank you.
No worries, Major General. Off you go.
Okay. Look, I'll get back to you on that. I'll just follow up where that AIC plan is at. I can find that out pretty quickly, so I'll try and come back to you before we actually finish this session, if you don't mind, Chair.
Not at all. I appreciate that, Major General. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, so could be some frantic SMSing going on right now. But if not, then on notice is fine. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay. On the AIC plans, I mean, I guess the sort of more substantial matter is around, you know, the requirements and how, you know, how much weight is given to the Australian industry capability plans. Is there any sort of advice on that you want to put on record?
Yeah, as part of my role, I'm responsible for defence industry policy, and the AIC portion of that comes under my remit. I note that there has been a recent ANAO audit that the Auditor General might want to report on, but it identified some clear disconnects between our policy and the way it's implemented within our contract framework, and we're looking at tightening that up. And it also identified the accountabilities that go with that. Under the National Defence Strategy, the Integrated Investment Plan and the Defence Industry Development Strategy, that is now updated on a biannual basis. We're now looking at those three in conjunction. They will be released publicly in around the April timeframe of next year, subject to then the budget in May. And we're reviewing how we undertake the AIC elements and hold industry accountable for that. We do consider Australian industry capability outcomes as part of our source evaluation reporting. We consider that as part of the scoring of whether or not an offer from industry has sufficient Australian industry outcomes. Australia does not have an offset policy. We use Australian industry outcomes through those contracting frameworks. I think for routinely, and I would give you a generalisation, we would normally achieve in acquisition 50 to 60% of Australian industry outcomes. It's a bit more difficult when you do foreign military sales because you're buying that into extant supply chains. In sustainment, we do much better, where historically we have been up to 80% in sustainment outcomes. The issue is a lot of times we're still reliant on overseas nations, for component parts. If it's built in Europe, you'd still be subject to that supply chain. If we're getting it from the US, you'd still be subject to that. So routinely, somewhere in the order of 55% for acquisitions, and rough order across all of our acquisitions in year, about 70% would be routinely what we would expect for Australian industry outcomes.
Thank you, Mr. Deeble. For the ANAO, just on the commenting of your performance report on Australian industry, is there any observations around?
We tabled a performance audit on the industry capability, maximising industry capability in May, on the 20th of May this year, and our finding was that the processes that Defence had in place were not effective. We made 9 recommendations on opportunities to improve administrative arrangements for maximising industry participation, and be happy to brief you more in full unless Amy, if you want to highlight any of the findings.
Is there, maybe just for the interest of time, is there any top of the pile ones you want to mention?
Just that we've done some analysis in that report around the tabling or the publication of the AIC report plans, and the findings in the report, the conclusion lands on not effective on the basis of those plans not being published in time. So it's consistent with what the issues you're raising today.
Yeah. Anything the Defence sort of wants to put on the record in response to the ANAO?
Look, we've taken on board the ANAO findings, and I would agree that there is work to be done in the AIC space. When that policy came in the 2018 timeframe, it was potentially a bit rushed, and they didn't pull the component parts together. And it really gets back to how do we hold industry accountable, how are we reporting and providing that visibility. That's where we're going to address that through the DIDs. So the findings of the report will drive our implementation of AIC moving forward.
So when... Yeah, absolutely, go for it.
I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask the ANAO whether there's anything that they've heard this morning that has either, in their opinion, contradicted or shed light on or clarified anything that was in their report, something new that has set off red flags for you.
I think what we've heard today is consistent with our findings in the NPR. I think I'd highlight in particular the changes in the approach around transparency and the importance of that for considering whether the NPR is providing the appropriate accountability and transparency to the Parliament. We haven't covered some of the other mechanisms that Defence has in place to report on its acquisition program, including through its annual report, and we audit an indicator of Defence's delivery of future capability through their performance statements audits as well. And so there is one question in considering how to evolve the MPR or the appropriateness of the MPR in the future, about how to leverage some of those other existing mechanisms within Defence. Defence currently, to prepare the MPR, draws upon a range of different systems within the organisations, and in the meantime there are systems being developed to provide reporting through other mechanisms. That's one other issue I would add.
Thank you.
Major General, you've received a message back.
Thank you, Chair. The AIC plan is with Rheinmetall Defence Australia and will be signed imminently, so it is not far away. We'll update accordingly, but it is with the Prime, Rheinmetall, at the moment.
My sincere apologies, Major General. The broadcasting in this room was a little bit scratchy. Do you mind just saying that one more time and maybe take a step to the left?
Yeah, the AIC plan is currently with Rheinmetall Defence Australia for signature, and it will be signed imminently.
Okay. I think for the maybe for the purposes of the committee, and we're going to wrap up in 1 second, it might be worth if Defence can put on the record around the timing and the thresholds around the AIC plans that maybe need to be met, and any comments on how often those are being met as well. That would be really useful for the committee in our deliberations. I think that we're going to have to wrap up there. There's obviously a lot more ground that we could have covered, but I really do appreciate all of the officials coming here today and answering all of the questions of the committee, and everyone as well who has joined us in the galleries who stepped up to the plate as well. I do appreciate your time and your honesty around all of the answers, and of course the Auditor General and the team from the ANAO for your thorough work in all of this. It is very much appreciated. There are some questions we might put on notice as well that we'll submit through probably myself as the chair that we'll send to you shortly. But if we can have questions, responses to those questions and the other ones that we agreed to by returning back to the Secretariat by Friday 21 November, please. And if the committee has any further questions by other committee members, then we'll send them through the Secretariat. Is there anything you wish to say, Mr. Debo?
Just one last point, and I do apologise for this. In answer to the earlier question from Ms. Aldred around, were we predicting real cost increase, I had neglected to think about the CMATS program that we subsequently talked about, where that was foreshadowed. So I do apologise that I had inferred that we weren't inferring that, but CMATS is definitely one of those. So Ms. Aldred, I apologise for my original answer.
No problem. All right. Well, if that's it, then I thank all members and witnesses for coming today, and I declare the hearing and the meeting closed.